Would you consider yourself a high-level entrepreneur? Now, most likely, if you're listening to this, you definitely are. And what I've heard over and over and over again is it's hard to find like-minded people that are like that too. Again, I'm from Maine, so I totally understand how difficult it can be. Thank goodness I have an amazing online community, so I know tons of them. And that is exactly why we are starting this brand new mastermind group with high-level, like-minded entrepreneurs, the ones that you can go alongside with that will help move you to the next level, let alone with kick butt coaching from me, because I like to slap you around, both on focus and on strategy. So if you're looking to double or triple this year, which I know most of you are, I want you to go ahead and apply and see if it's a good fit for you. I will totally tell you if it's not, and if I wouldn't do it if I were you. But go to eventualmillionaire.com/apply. We are looking for amazing, like-minded entrepreneurs. My previous mastermind members have told me it is life changing. So take the time today, fill out the very quick application, and we'll see if it's a fit. Take care.
Potent advice and inspiration from real self-made millionaires. Welcome to The Eventual Millionaire with your host, Jaime Masters.
Welcome to Eventual Millionaire, and I'm super excited to have Roger Hamilton on the show today. His vision aligns perfectly with everything that you guys are doing because he has a brand new book called The Millionaire Master Plan. You need to make sure you take a look at it. It's really, really interesting. I read a ton of stuff about millionaires, and yet this had some really cool information that I hadn't ever heard of before. You have your own systems, which I think is killer. He also is a futurist and social entrepreneur, and I'm really excited to have him on the show today. Thanks so much for coming on, Roger.
Great to be here, Jaime.
So this is really cool because I get sent books all the time. No offense to the people who send me lots of books. But your book, I was like, this is so cool. And it aligned perfectly well with what we have. So I was really excited to have you on. Why don't you give us sort of the primer on what the book is about?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I actually kick it off with my story, but then I have lots of stories of other people that have gone on their path as well. And I think for me, the main thing is I'm probably the same as you, Jenny. When I was starting off, I read all the books, right? And what I found was that every book I read, no matter how convincing it was, there was someone who had the opposite advice. I'm not just talking about authors who hadn't been there. I'm talking about, you'd read Richard Branson's book, and Richard Branson would say, go start a business and take risks. And then you'd read like Warren Buffett's book, who would say, actually, like, you don't have to start a business at all. You can just invest in other people's businesses and don't take big risks, kind of take very, very small ones. And they're the total opposite of each other. And so I got obviously really confused by all this information. And it was only in my mid-20s that I kind of started realizing there was a bit of a map going on that people were following, and they were following different paths. So the book is all about going to the million, meeting other people that have gone the same way. But it's all about a personalized path, which is why I have this test at the beginning, which finds out what your genius is, what your level is. And so it's a bit like saying, well, here's a map, but you better know where you are and where you want it. Like if you go to Paris, it's like a map is still going to make you lost if you don't know where you are and where you want to go. But the moment you say, right, here's where I am, here's where I want to go, you can now use that map in such a way that you can say, right, I'm following Richard Branson, not Warren Buffett. He's going to the Louvre, he's going to the Eiffel Tower. That's where I want to go. And then you end up basically then getting what I call the difference of information and direction. Information is when you get overwhelmed with everything, and we've now got all the information in the world on our smartphones. Direction is when you're just deleting 99.9% of all the information to just know, what do I need to do to get from A to B? And then off you go and you do that. So that's really what the book's about.
Yeah, which is one of the hardest things ever to do, which is why I thought it was really interesting, because I took the test at the beginning. I've interviewed like 150 millionaires, right? And it's so funny because after each show, they'll give me advice for my business. And the funny thing is they don't really know my business very well, and yet they're great with giving advice. And at the beginning, I was like, oh, this is amazing. And so I'd go this way, and then I'd be like, oh, now I'm over here. Like it was so bad. So that's why I really think it's huge to really know what your strengths are. How did you come up with that test and working on all that?
It's really interesting because I still remember my first year at Cambridge. I went to Cambridge University to study architecture, and I couldn't understand why for the entire first year we designed no buildings. Everything we did was studying humans. And it was afterwards, there's this saying by Goethe, which is that architecture is like crystallized music. It's kind of like, at every culture has a fishbowl. Architecture becomes that bowl. And so if you don't understand people, you're never going to understand how to design for the people who are in your generation today. And by understanding people, what was really clear is that every group of people were different, and it wasn't like anyone was right or wrong. We learned all about psychology, sociology. I got so interested in that. And I had no idea that later when I started my entrepreneurial career, it would come back where I was like, well, why is it that person is so great with people? They hate the numbers. They're not following any of the things that people say you have to do about following finances, and they're still successful. Those people there, they basically hate the people, and they don't even want to go meet people. And everyone else is saying, go out and network and learn sales and marketing. They're not doing that, and they created a system which has made them $1 million. And what I did one day, I remember it was like when I was my late 30s, I had different people I was working with and mentoring. And I didn't start as a mentor. I actually started just kind of like, sharing with other people. I'm sure, same as you, just out of curiosity. But then people said, hey, you seem to know this person. Can you spend some time in my business? And that was before we even knew what mentoring was. So I was doing that. And the difference of writing a book or kind of putting out a blog where you're saying, here's a way of doing things, where you might get, 1 out of 1,000 people writing back saying, that's great advice. And you never hear from the other 999. So you don't even know whether what you're saying is actually working. When you're mentoring someone or you're showing up every month with someone, pretty quick if you say, here, go try this because it works for me. And then a month later, they come back and said, well, I tried it and that sucked. It didn't work at all. And you're like, okay. And so I sat down on the beach one day in Singapore and I said, well, how many different types of people are there? And when I actually started kind of working that out and seeing what that looked like, that's really where all this came from. But it wasn't just like 5 minutes sitting on the beach doing that. It was all that history that I'd had experiencing different types of people through my entrepreneurial career, and also looking at all these different tools like what Carl Jung created. There's things like what Plato had as kind of like the 4 archetypes within society. In the I Ching, it talks about already these 5 different elements. And so I brought all of that knowledge in to the kind of structures that we can kind of use for modern day.
Which is really, really cool. It must be really empowering to go through the history and be like, I can figure this stuff out too. Because I think that's what's really interesting. Usually we get like tests or whatever, but you created your own test based on everything that you've known from before. And it was killer. Like, I was really impressed with it. So being able to sort of pull all the pieces and then come up with something like this, it must be insane now that your book is in the world to have people give you their thoughts on you, sitting on the beach creating something.
Yeah, it's really great to just see. I think one of the things that many people aren't aware of is most kind of like personality testing, psychometric testing, which is used it's like using the army, it's using the government, it's using all these different companies. Most of it came out of the work of Carl Jung at the beginning of the 19th century. He was like the student of Sigmund Freud. And what most people don't realize was he was really inspired by the I Ching, which is the Chinese book of changes. In fact, he was the first to publish the I Ching in the West. And the I Ching was actually relating different types to time. Now, if you're an entrepreneur, the most important thing is relating what you're doing to time, because we know that our businesses go through cycles, from when you start it in the spring all the way through to when it gets into autumn and winter and everything's got to get bedded down. We know that our industries go through cycles. We feel what happens when we have a winning formula that's working, and then suddenly that winning formula stops working. It's like the industry, our team, everything's moved on, and it's like, whoa, that winning formula has become a losing formula. I gotta reinvent myself now because my leadership's not working anymore, or my product marketing is not working anymore. And the thing is, what Carl Jung did by creating these kind of like 4 seasons, which is kind of like the 4 different types that I talk about, is that became part of things like MBTI, disc profiling, and things like that. He spent the rest of his life on this whole idea of time, right? That's what he was so fascinated by. And that's where things like synchronicity and collective unconscious came up, that he came up with, which is what we entrepreneurs work with every day. But it's until I started creating things like the Genius Test, Wealth Dynamics, there was no personality test that you could take which linked who you were to time, to the cycle of time. And so I think that's why it's become so popular with entrepreneurs, because we have to do that. You can't just say, well, I'm a kind of a deep, and it's like, it doesn't help you if you're actually in the winter phase of your business. You have to know what to do differently as you're going through the cycles. So I think that's a really, really important difference in what I'm doing and why it's probably taken off so much.
I think that's awesome. Well, even with Myers-Briggs, I remember I've taken it multiple times, and sometimes I'm an introvert and sometimes I'm an extrovert, and it just sort of depends on, what sort of thing I'm in. And I think that's what's really interesting. Like, actually putting it through time is insane, because we change. We're people. We change.
Yeah.
Only constant, right?
Exactly right.
So let's talk about your entrepreneurial journey, because you said, you read all the books, you were really gung-ho. What was that beginning start for you?
The very first thing I tried was almost out of necessity. It was when I was at Cambridge and I was in my second year as a student there, and my director of studies had told me if I didn't work on my portfolio, because you have to have a big portfolio of lots of stuff to get a good mark. If I didn't work on my portfolio over the summer, then I was gonna fail. So I was like, I got to do that. I had got really into the rowing scene because Cambridge is like major on rowing. So second thing was, all right, I really want to go in the rowing camp, which kind of is a conflict straight away. And the third thing is all my friends were going to Greece and they were off to this kind of like amazing trip. And they had jobs in London. I'd come from a family which was living in Hong Kong. I had no job. I was like, oh man, how am I going to make some money out of this? And so I was kind of stuck in this situation. And I did the thing accidentally that all great entrepreneurs do, which is combine all the challenges together into one big thing. And what I did was I asked myself the question, could I fill my portfolio while being on rowing camp and making enough money to go on a trip to Greece? And when I thought that out, what I did the next day was I went out and I started doing drawings at different parts of Cambridge. I put up a big sign which says genuine Cambridge architecture student, 1 drawing for £1 or £2, 3 drawings for £5. And I went and photocopied them and put them into little freezer bags so they looked really great. And that was my very first business that I started. And what I learned over that for the next couple of weeks is really what got me hooked on being an entrepreneur. Because what I really learned wasn't go get a product and go out and sell it. What I really learned was the power of flow, which is what I talk about a lot. And I'll give you one example of that. There's lots in this 2-week period I had. But one example would be, I would notice in the first day that if I was just drawing, no one would buy, everyone was walking by, no one would actually stop to buy my drawings. If someone stopped just to look, then 2 or 3 other people would stop, and invariably I would sell a drawing. So I realized that if I stop people, I would sell in a way that if I didn't stop people, I wouldn't. So I would actually start stopping people and asking them for the time. They would stop, other people would then stop, then they'd buy. And then I noticed that if I stopped a kid, like they had a whole family, so now 5 people are stopping. So I stopped asking people for the time and I started asking kids, hey, do you want to watch me draw for a bit? And they go, sure, mom, dad, can we stop? Then they'd stop, and then a whole bunch of people stop. I sell even more. And I started realizing, wow, like when Buckminster Fuller talks about wealth being controlled time. And I really understood what that meant now, which is like, flow and managing flow, whether they're coming through your website, whether they're coming through your retail store, and slowing things down and speeding it up is how money is actually made. And that got me hooked in this whole concept of time, which I mentioned earlier, which is what I think entrepreneurs are. We're masters of time. If you're too far ahead of yourself, or if you're too far behind yourself, you're out of the sweet spot. But the moment you get in that sweet spot, the money starts showing up, and all lack comes from going too fast or too slow, just like in a car. That's what's going to stall the car as well. So it's all about that pacing, and that got me hooked. And from there, I just started one business after another. But I got to tell you, that sounds exciting. Until I was about 25 years old, every single business I started failed, and I had no clue why. And I just want to know it was very, very painful. To take the cynic route was very, very painful. And it was a long distant memory going to Greece and going on the camp and all that kind of stuff. I was ready to give up actually by my 20s. It had just gone so horribly wrong. So I knew how to start. I had no idea how to finish.
So let's talk about the failures, because I think that's important. Everybody likes hearing about the failures, especially in becoming a master of time. Because I think one of the things is you can say you need to become a master of time, but it's like, okay, that sounds great. I would love to do that, but how do I do that? So let's go through your story of like failing, so you figured out how you did it.
Yeah. Well, okay. So what happened with that business was one thing led to another, where instead of me making money from doing drawings of for tourists, I ended up doing drawings for retail owners who had more money. And I actually ended up with these maps all over England called cityscapes, where by the time I was 20, we had like 40 different cities all over England. And we were a multi-million-dollar business. What? So it all looked great. Yeah, it was kind of a wild story. But then what happened was I sold the business to a printing company. And what was interesting about that story was in selling the business, the whole process of selling it, it's like, hey, do you want to be paid like in one lump sum? Do you want to be paid over time? A bit like winning the lottery, right? It's like, oh, look at that. And I worked out I could actually get paid over time and never have to work again. I was like, oh, I'm totally taking that one. I had no understanding about culture, how to build a culture in a company. I had no understanding of how much my own personal individuality is what was driving the business. So when I stopped applying myself to the business in the same way, that whole business collapsed without me. So I ended up getting nothing. In fact, it got worse than that because I owed those things I didn't understand on the detail side. Like in order for me to sell the business, I'd gone from what in England I think it's the same in America. We have a partnership where you have all the liability yourself. We turn it into a limited company, which meant the liability was in the company. I went from making all this money, which I owed this tax for personally. I turned it into a company which I could then sell. The company then collapsed under the new management, and I ended up having to pay all of this tax, which I didn't have the money for anymore, UK government. And it was just a nightmare going from like, I got all this money to suddenly it's like, I owe all this money and I don't have it. That was my first failure where, if I was to sum it up, I had used my strengths, my genius, which is what I call it, which is my creativity. And with creativity comes with a weakness. It's like your kryptonite, which is your lack of attention to detail. And it was my lack of attention to detail. In hindsight, I can look back and I can see it wasn't my creativity that made me fail. It was the opposite. It was the thing that I wasn't good at, which made me fail. It's a bit like I turned on the tap and I was good at doing that, but there was this leaky plumbing, which I wasn't looking at. And so no matter how much I turned it on, it wasn't ever going to come out the other end anyway. And that was like a big insight. And pretty much every one of my failures was a different failure of somewhere in the plumbing.
Really? Okay, so before we go through the rest of the failures, then let's talk about the geniuses.
It's going to be a painful conversation.
That's what I'm here for. I'm helping you out now. Everyone wants to know how bad it was. So tell us about the geniuses, because I love the kryptonite piece and the other piece. I haven't ever heard it talked about like this before. So if you could give us sort of a rundown of what you've got for that, it's really cool.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So in summary, think of a square, and in a square, think of 4 seasons: spring, summer, autumn, winter, and the fact that we all have a genius. So as the saying goes, we're all born a genius, but if you judge a fish by his ability to climb a tree, is going to go through his whole life believing it's stupid. We are trained when we go to school to not focus at our strength. Like, I'm great at being creative, but I didn't spend that much time on art because I got an A pretty quickly on that. So I spent the extra time that I'd otherwise be doing art trying to study for my French, which I was terrible at. So as a result of that, the things I wasn't so good at, I was getting C's and D's. I had to spend most of my time trying to improve on, instead of getting my A's to be, kind of a plutonium A, right? You like, you get an A, that's pretty much it. Like, go on to other things you're not so good at. And so we get trained in life to do things that feel like hard work. It's a bit like folding your arms, where, like, without even thinking about it, I fold it like left over right over left. But if I then was like, I'll do the opposite, I can do it. It doesn't feel comfortable. I've got to think about it. It's definitely hard work, and I'll probably forget it next time I do it again. So understanding that for a lot of us, we're trying to learn things that we're not so good at, and every one of these has got something which we're not so good at. So the geniuses are, number one, the dynamo geniuses, who are the spring energy. So think of people like Steve Jobs, Richard Branson. Richard Branson will get criticized for not doing numbers because he's dyslexic. He doesn't even read a balance sheet. Steve Jobs will be criticized for not being so good at his man leadership skills, but he's just so awesome with his products. He doesn't have to worry about that. Other people can do that. Same with Bill Gates and so on. So these are people who are very good at starting things, not so good at finishing things. So many people relate to that. Blaze genius are the kind of Oprah Winfrey's, Donald Trumps of the world, where it's all about the extrovert side now. They're good at asking the question who, as opposed to the question what. And they're really great at relationships, and they build business models based on that, which is a very different type of business model. And then also good on the numbers side, but they don't need to be. People like Jack Welch, Rudy Giuliani, they're all coming from that part. Tempo genius are the opposite of dynamo. So dynamo's head in the clouds. Tempo genius is ear to the ground. Think of the difference of creating value through innovation as opposed to through timing. So Warren Buffett, George Soros, people who are really good at timing, they don't have to create anything new. In fact, they go out of their way from doing that because they're actually got their ear to the ground. So they're actually watching things in a very different way. I'm a dynamo genius. I'm terrible at timing, right? I will always think that it takes 5 minutes to do a 15-minute journey, and so I'm late for every meeting, right? And I'm like, in my 40s now, I still haven't figured that thing out. I don't know. So, and then you then have the steel genius, which is basically the opposite of the Blaze. So think of Blaze like right brain, steel is left brain, and I'm probably doing all opposite for the video, but basically left brain is like, think of the introverts, people who used to be like the Rockefellers and the Gettys today are like the Jeff Bezos, the Mark Zuckerbergs. They don't have to create a product. They don't have to go out there and have their TV show because they've got such a great system that everyone's using that system instead. So these are the 4 different geniuses. They break up more into something I call wealth dynamics, which are the 8 different profiles. So you've got deal makers, mechanics, and so on. But just as a summary, understanding those 4, you can suddenly see why a team, when it goes from form, storm, norm, perform, has a different leader at each one of those 4 levels. How an industry, as it goes from spring to winter, has different people that become wealthy at different times, and how the reasons that people who are great at being creative are making most of the money outside of America, because America's in winter season right now, that they're doing that, they're traveling to other parts. Whereas the people who are actually coming into America, like the Chinese who've got their money to invest, the Carlos Slims, the Warren Buffetts are making all their money right now because of the winter season. Understanding that cycle is really powerful to be able to move forward as well. So that's really it in a nutshell, the 4 geniuses.
I love that. I also love how you're sort of like,
there?
yeah, we're cutting out a little bit. We're doing okay for right now. I can still understand what you're saying, which is good. But I think it's funny that you're saying like you're not great with time, and yet you're the whole futurist, and you talk about time for absolutely everything. So you're not good managing it, but you're good with everything else, like looking forward thinking, which is really impressive. So tell us. Yeah, go ahead.
Just that point, I think that we think of our attention, and someone who is a dynamo genius is like attention like a hose. They're the ones that can create a jet, which means they can see 10 years or 20 years in the future. So most futurists are dynamo geniuses, because they're like, wow, I can see 50 years ahead, but know where I'm going to be in 5 minutes. All right, that's the difference of the jet and the sprinkler, which is what is the tempo genius. So we've all got a different frequency of time. So these, you can call these geniuses, you can also call them frequencies, just like frequencies on a radio station, where when you tune into your station, you can hear your music. And most of us, for me in my 20s, most of the time I was tuned to static. I was just hearing the noise and trying to dance to that. And it's not a pretty sight when that happens.
Well, let's talk about that, because I really want to know the rest of the story on how you actually figured out you're a dynamo and could actually, because I love how you said you made the switch and then it was easier from there. And I want to hear about how, it went from hard to easy from that switch.
Sure. Okay. Well, that was a critical moment. Well, there's 2 critical moments that happened very short with each other in my mid-20s. The first one was a very emotional one. And I kind of start the book about this, where I was so wrapped up in my business, trying to make it work, wasn't paying myself enough. I was ignoring my own personal finances, saying one day I'm going to make the business successful. I was now in Singapore with a publishing company that I'd set up, and I was putting all my time, all my effort, all my money into this company, believing it was going to be successful tomorrow. And there was no evidence to show me it was going to be. But I was kind of like, all this like ever optimist, which is what dynamos are. And as I was going home one day and I got back to my house, a tow truck driver had come to repossess our car. And I was like, oh no, I cannot believe this. It's like I was walking down the street. I could hear Renata, my wife, and she was outside pleading with the tow truck driver. I hadn't been honest with her, so I hadn't told her just how bad our finances were. We had just had our first daughter, Kathleen. So Kathleen was on, Renata's shoulder, arm, and all the neighbors were out. So I was like, I cannot believe this. It's like everyone's out. It's like a major, humiliating public spectacle that's about to happen here. And so I had to go down and try and explain to the tow truck driver that we'd be able to pay, and I'd have to get the money from the business. He was the wrong guy to ask. He wasn't interested. He took the car away. Renata realized what was going on, so she just went back inside. She was like totally unhappy about it. All the neighbors were like, well, better for us not to be here. And they all left. And I was just left there. And I think a lot of us, we've had those moments where things get really bad. And we may have a reason for it. We might have lost our job. We might, the industry might have changed. I had no one to blame but myself. So I'm there thinking, I made all this. I'm supposed to be smart. I went to Cambridge University. How could I end up in such a stupid situation as this, where if I was to say, what would be your worst nightmare possible, this would be it. And it was that night I thought, I got to change stuff here. Whatever I believe I'm doing, which is working, clearly is not working. I got to just be real about this, right? And it was that day which actually made me shift everything. And I made that shift. And the biggest shift I made came from what a mentor said to me several years earlier. I'd gone out to see a mentor. I'd gone for all my ideas for my business in my early 20s. The first thing he said when he saw me, because in my levels I talk about in the book, I was at infrared level, which is someone who's going more in debt every single month. I know a lot of entrepreneurs who quit their job and get into this state, which is high frequency stress. It's almost like putting on infrared goggles where everything's heat waves. And I was showing up to him saying, I'm going to do this in my business. How do I make this money tomorrow? He could see straight through me. His first question to me was, how's your personal finances? And I was like, what's that going to do, if anything? I'll make my money later. And he goes, if you're not willing to invest in yourself, I'm not willing to invest in you either. Basically what he was saying was that our business is a mirror of ourselves. If we're not willing to take care of ourselves first, and we've all heard pay yourself first, but this was different. This is about the vibrational energy in which you're showing up every day. And I can guarantee anyone who is out there at the moment who might be watching this, who goes, geez, I feel that. I've got this great idea. I go out and I speak to people about my idea. They glaze over once I start talking about it. Then someone else comes along with an idea that's not even as good. They go up and talk to them, and suddenly they're in this conversation. What is it that's happening, which is that they're not even wanting to listen to my idea? And it's the energy that we give off when we're showing up, because there's this stress level that we kind of like, we've run out of time. We've got to go chasing after stuff. I remembered him saying that. And I also remembered what happened at that point, which was that he went through this process for me to kind of sort my own stuff out, which was not just going cash flow positive myself, but creating a ladder where I'd be saying, what would it take to go $100 cash flow positive personally myself, not my business, to 200, to 400, to 800, to double it up. You double it up 10 times, it becomes over $100,000 a month, which is over $1 million a year. And we had a conversation several years back where he said, just go do that. You'll be a millionaire within a year. And I remember at that point, because I was, obviously went to school in England, so I was a big skeptic. I was like, nah, this is a crazy American guy telling me this stuff. It ain't ever going to happen that way, because I can see how I can get from 100 to 200 in 1 month just by paying myself more. I cannot see how to get from 50,000 to 100,000 by October. Not going to happen. And he said to me, well, then if the frequency of month by month is too short for you and you don't believe it, what about year by year? And it was 32 when I had this conversation with him. And I was there thinking, wow, I was 22. And I was thinking 10 years time, if it was 10 years to get to the 100,000, I would be 32. That's so old. And I was like, well, I would be really disappointed if it takes me 10 years to get to that. And he says, okay, so now we're just arguing about frequency, right? It's not whether it's going to happen, it's just a matter of when it's going to happen. I totally disregarded that whole conversation and went straight back into my business again. But when I remembered that, standing on that street without my car, I said, right, well, if 1 year at a time wasn't exciting, if 1 month at a time wasn't believable, what am I actually going to do? And I set a 3-month frequency. And every quarter, I went from 100 to 200, 200, 400, and I just religiously kept to that. Within 2.5 years, after 10 cycles, I was over $100,000 a month. And how I was making my money was I went from my publishing business, which got me up to about $3,000 a month extra, where I was like, too difficult to do in the publishing business anymore. I was like, hey, look, events, those guys are doing conferences, or I'm going to partner with them. That got me up to more like the 8 to 10,000. Then it's like, that's not going to get me further up. Oh, look, those guys are doing property, got into that. Within 2.5 years, I was in different industries, making money in different ways, because I was seeing that the number one thing that was important was the flow coming through me. And coming back to time, what this is really about is not about the money. What this is about is how much do you value your time? How much are you willing to, like those stories about they won't even wake up in the morning for less than $10,000. It's like, what are you willing to do with your time? Because if you're not willing to value your time, fundamentally, your business is just a reflection of your value of your time. And if your value of your time is really low because your self-worth is so low, well, then of course you're not going to make any money in your business either. So that was really the turning point, which then shifted my whole thinking. And pretty much my whole life's been that way since, where instead of it being my business being the sun in my solar system where I'm spinning around and getting dizzy, and my poor wife is spinning around me as a moon. It's like me and my family are like the center now. We can create, like, my business can be an earth like going around, and I can have multiple businesses, multiple planets around my solar system. And my only focus is, how do I make my sun, which is me and everything I do, just like Richard Branson, Warren Buffett, they all do this. How do I make that brighter, stronger, attract more mass, attract more planets to come in orbit? Because if I just do that, I don't have to move anywhere. I don't have to get dizzy. And then you've got something which actually creates that kind of like dent in the universe, which is really the big shift.
I love dent in the universe is a really cool term just in general. So tell me a little bit, because what it sounded like you were doing, especially way back then, was trying to get from A to Z without going through all the other points, right? You're like, oh, I want that. And I see this all the time with people that I talk to, with people that email me that are like, oh, I'm here now. I want $1 million business next year. And I'm like, okay, let's look at B first. And so, like you said, so you decided on the time frame, which I think is really, really interesting to go, okay, 3 months is exciting and interesting, but you went hopping from different things to different things. And most of the time I hear for advice to focus on one thing and like make that successful and then go forward. But when you only give yourself so many months to work on something, how do you mitigate and manage all that?
Yeah, I mean, like the analogy I give to what you're sharing is like trying to learn how to ski by starting on the black run. It's kind of like whoa, I can see everyone's kind of doing loop-the-loops and jumping around. Well, that's what I want to do. So I'll just start on the black run and go straight that way, which is kind of crazy because basically what you're
Because you
doing,
might die. Yeah.
yeah, and you get in everyone's way. Everyone gets annoyed at you, right? But so it's, and you can't actually even do the snowplow on the black run. It's not even like you can actually get the basic skills you need to get balance when it's too steep and the flow's too much. So you have to start on the nursery slope and you have to grow up. And then, of course, you can get to the black run, provided you're taking it step by step. I really believe that the two greatest assets that are necessary for us to get what we're really looking for us to get the attraction within our business, so we don't have to go chasing everything. The two most fundamental things are confidence and credibility. Confidence is our internal commitment to ourselves. It's like the moment we lose our confidence, like you get on a ski slope and you keep falling over, you just don't even want to show up there anymore. So your progress has got to be one where you're saying, am I doing things in a way where I'm not kind of failing where I'm sinking, I'm failing where I'm steering. I'm kind of like learning things, but not to the extent that I've lost all my confidence and I've lost all my money. And there's always a way to take that next step which stretches you, and then you've then got that stronger kind of muscle to grow forward. That's failures that steer you. And as opposed to failures that sink you. Credibility is the same thing. This is not so much, how much are you willing to commit to yourself, which is through confidence. It's how much are other people willing to commit to you for credibility. The moment you say, I've got this big idea and I'm going to do it tomorrow, and they can look around at what you're doing today and you lose your credit, they're not going to say to you, that's not credible, because most people are too polite. They're just going to say, well, good luck with that.
And make a face.
Right?
Good luck with that.
Yeah, that's right. And that's it. And it's like, well, what did they not know? What did they not like about it? Why are they not supporting me? Is frankly because you haven't earned the right yet to be talking that big game. And so knowing that there is a time frame and a structure by which you can be growing your credibility as you go. I mean, I know by me launching my book in the US, we managed to get a whole bunch of different partners mailing for us. I was very aware. Most people in America haven't heard of me because most of what I do in Asia. So I could either spend years and years and years trying to build my credibility here, or I could go partner with other people that had really strong credibility, who already were best-selling authors, who'd be willing to support me. And that way I could parachute in as opposed to climb up. But understanding how important credibility is to actually even do anything. So you don't have to be out there trying to promote something where it might be a great product, people don't even want it. That's one of the most important things. So there's a step-by-step, and knowing which level you're at is allowing you to know what the steps are in order for you to get to the top of that level. Then you almost got to reverse it to step up to the level above that.
See, and I think that's a huge point because Stephen Covey was one of the people on your book, and also Phil Town. And I'm like, well, I respect those guys. And I like the name of the book. So I'm assuming, based on their credibility, that I can rely on you too, which is sort of an interesting piece for sure, especially not knowing somebody at all beforehand. So I think that's really, really awesome. But how do we start doing that? Number one, I think one of the things that you talked about before is self-responsibility and sort of knowing where you are and sort of taking responsibility for where you are, because sometimes we're not very good at that. But how can we sort of take where we are right now? Like if somebody was just listening to this just now, haven't read the book yet, but really want some advice on like, how can I increase my confidence and increase my credibility so that way I can be taken more seriously and get in the flow and make more money, what would you give them for advice?
Okay, so the first thing is you need to know where you are. Like if you've got a map, you've got to say, where am I going, right? So that's generic. But let's get into some specifics about what it looks like and what the device is that changes depending on where you are. And let's say, we've been talking quite a bit about what I would call the foundation prism, which is how do you sort out your personal flow? That's kind of like that story from where I'm at. But many of your listeners will be people who've already moved past that. They've kind of sorted out their personal stuff. They've got a business going. They might be saying something like, well, I'm enjoying my business and I'm making a bunch of money, but like seriously, I've run out of time and I can't find the team I need to actually grow things right now. What am I meant to do to find that team? And by being really aware, I'm just going to go through very quickly the 3 levels. There's 9 levels in total. These are the 3 levels of something called the enterprise prism, which is how all money flows in all of our markets. And they're yellow, green, and blue. And if you think about it like music, yellow is the player, like the guy playing the guitar. People are going to show up and listen to them because they're just great at what they do. But the moment you stop playing that guitar, the money stops. You've got to shop every day to do this thing. Then the next step up, which is green level, is the performer, where you might be playing the guitar, you might be playing the drums, but they're coming for the band now, not for you. You can even leave the stage and the music's going to keep playing. So this is, if we talk about familiar people like Seth Godin, people like Tim Ferriss, they are 100% yellow level. Everything they talk about is like, hey, you want to have freedom? Because the number one value of someone at yellow level is freedom. It's like everything revolves around me. One person doing all things. I'll outsource stuff, but basically, I've got freedom of my time. I can travel around the world. Guess what? Green level isn't about that anymore. You want to go higher up. Green level is Jim Collins, Green Level is now, talking about like, how do you create a high performing team? People like Stephen Covey, where you're going to show up every day. You're going to be at that finance meeting. It's almost like you've gone back to a job. You're creating a culture for your company. You're asking them for advice. It's like, wow, wait a minute. I thought I just gave up all that stuff. But you need to go to Green Level to actually know how to attract high performers, or else no one's ever going to play for you. You're going to have to keep on showing up for yourself. Some people decide to just stay yellow all their life. But if you want to go up to green, I'll go through in a moment how you do that and how it's the opposite of what got you to yellow. And then the step above that is called the conductor. That's the blue level. Conductors are the people who, they're not even facing the audience anymore. Like someone like Richard Branson, conductor level, he's not facing his audience. He's facing his performers. He says, well, as long as I find great performers, I'll make sure they're in rhythm. They'll be the ones that run my businesses. So a lot of people misunderstand multiple streams of income. I actually think multiple streams is when you put your time in a bunch of different things, which is the worst thing you can do, because it means you're pushing up multiple kind of like cars up a hill, and every time you push up one, the others fall down again. Richard Branson doesn't have multiple streams. He has multiple teams of income. He's at conductor level where every instrument's being played on its own. He's not trying to play all the instruments. I call that octopus, right? And some people at yellow levels like, yeah, I've got all these different businesses. I must be super successful. No, that's an octopus. An octopus basically means you've got many tentacles. They're still all connected to you, right? Many tentacles, small brain, everything sucks, right? That's
That's great.
Oh, look, everything's successful. It's like, no, it's not. The moment you stop, everything falls down. And so then you go, so how do I move from one to the next? And yellow level is all about something called independence. Independence is something you learn which allows you to be able to start a business without having to have a job. By the way, the one below that is the people who are stuck in a job who can't even figure out how to get to yellow because we weren't taught that at school. But if you learn how to do the yellow thing and you've got an online business or you've got a small business of some sort and you're like, holy cow, I keep on wanting to grow, but I can't, I'd guarantee there are one of three excuses you're using. It will be one of these three. Either excuse number one, yeah, I definitely want other people to run my business for me, but I can't find people as good as me, right? That's the first one. I just can't find people that can do what I
Because
can.
I'm amazing, so,
I do all this kind of stuff. And the reason that happens is because you designed a business that works for you, where you're the center of it. But you and in order to move forward, you can't do that anymore. You've got to fragment your business, your job down into different things that other people can do. And there's a particular way to do that most of us never learned at yellow level because we're always taking it on for ourselves. It's like not how do you have a to-do list, it's how you have a not to-do list. It's how having a who's doing what list, which is very, very different. And that's a very different mindset. It's the opposite. It's not independence, it's interdependence. It's not how do I make money every day. It's like how do I help other people make money? And you've actually changed your business model where the majority of it goes to other people. It's not even money coming to yourself. How's your marketing cost? What's your partnerships? What's your leadership margin that you're putting in for leadership? You don't have all those. And usually what it means is you're redirecting the market you're going for to have high margins. You might be stopping selling those products because the only way you can actually deliver is you're the one who has to do it. But if you create this product in this way, now it's in partnership, you don't have to do it anymore. So there's specific ways that I've seen many people, and I've worked with many people that have gone up to that level. It could be a second excuse, which is, yeah, I know there's people as good as me. I could even organize that, but I don't have the money for them, right? It's like I can't pay them because they're too expensive. Same thing. It's like you haven't set up the margins and the structure in a way that allows you to be able to do that. And you can create a bridge into that. And the bridge is not about you being Superman the whole time, because even Superman has to be Clark Kent some of the time. So it's about saying, right, I'm going to spend more time with Clark Kent because I've got to have more than one set of stretchy pants. It can't just be me out there flying, saving the world. I got to get a whole pantheon of superhumans now. So superheroes. So now I've got to spend more time Clark Kent making the money that it allows me to have this team and now created a bridge and now off they go. Or the third thing is I don't have the time, which is back to this whole time thing. But most importantly, it's realizing, wow, the success principles and formula I used to get me to yellow level and be a player is actually the opposite of what I want to do to green level. I pride myself in being able to show up and on the spot figure things out, but a band on stage, they spend more time in rehearsals before they even get on stage to plan all this stuff out and have it in place. Have I sat with my team and have we actually set up a plan for 2015 already? Have I asked them what the culture is that we're going to be part of? What's the plan? Or is it me who's the one who's telling them what to do? Everything reverses around. You're having to basically create something which is called learned incompetence. I'll tell you a quick story. When I met Richard Branson last year in Necker, he was down having a drink in the bar. I came up and we started talking about Bali. Within like 2 or 3 minutes, he says to me, it's interesting. You do all the social entrepreneur things and so on. I'm trying to work out these things on Virgin Night. I don't know if I have the right model or not. What do you think? And then I'm sitting with Margarita. Well, you know what? I've seen this and this and this. And within 5 minutes of meeting him, I'm there thinking to myself, what just happened here? I'm giving advice to a billionaire. Who do I think I am? And it was his skill of being able to basically come across being with a learned incompetence. It's like, hey, look, I don't have the answers. I don't know. What do you think? Which is at yellow levels, the opposite. It's like, hey, I've got solutions. I've got answers. And suddenly you have to actually pull back from all of that. And when someone has an idea, or when you bring out the idea, you start attracting great people because they're like, hey, I'm being appreciated here. I'm able to share my view. And that he has such a skill set of doing that. And it's a skill set you need to learn, because it's not what allows you to actually get started in the first place, because you had to have, if anything, an inflated competence to begin with, or confidence to begin with, but you've got to kind of deflate that down again. So just by appreciating, if you put your foot on the accelerator in first gear, that is not the winning formula that gets you to second gear. You actually have to do the opposite, which is, hey, that winning formula worked to get me this fast. Now I've got to take my foot off, move up a gear. That glass ceiling is the one that I think most of us don't really appreciate until we get stuck at it for too long. And then we realize, clearly, I have to change everything to go to the next level.
See, I think this stuff is so interesting. So, and that's the thing, a lot of the people, especially a lot of people listening in, are either stuck in day jobs and want to get to yellow level, or they're yellow level right now and looking like, oh, wait, that's why it's not totally working, because I need to actually take some of this down in order to go to the next step, which I think is really huge. Being able to see into the future and sort of predict what's coming. Exactly. So how you have to change is huge. Awesome. So I know we have to start.
My power, just so you know, if you think why I'm running away for a minute, right? Don't worry, I haven't gone far.
Oh no, I made him leave. That'd be the first time. That actually would be kind of funny. I'd have some good marketing spiel on that.
Yeah, I'm back. See, here we go.
All right, he came back. Phew. So we have to start wrapping up on this side of the fence, but I highly recommend, because I know we can only go through so much for all the pieces, and it's way easier to like read it in the book and to really understand, because I'm sort of asking you all different pieces and parts. And so if you actually go through, it's really well laid out, and you can take the assessments and all that fun stuff too. But I'm going to ask you the same last question that I ask for everybody, and it's, what's one action listeners can take this week to help move them forward towards their goal of $1 million?
Right.
Besides just buy your book.
Outside of getting
Besides buy the book,
exactly.
Yes.
Outside of that, I think that the biggest one is being very aware that we wake up with the same 24 hours of time every day as Bill Gates or Warren Buffett. That for many of us, in our minds, we're thinking, in order for us to make more money, we need to have more money. You know, I'd do that if I had the money and so on, without realizing that, like, all the most successful people, they become successful, coming back to this point about time, the moment they add a zero to their time. You know, if you think about your time right now, what's my time worth right now than the things I'm doing? $10 an hour, $100 an hour. Okay, what would it be if it was worth $1,000 an hour? What would I need to be doing differently right now today? Who would I need to be working with? Where would I need to be showing up? Because there's a pretty good chance you wouldn't be answering your emails. There's a pretty good chance you wouldn't be there kind of just coming up with some strategy to make another 10,000. You'd be doing something which was going to deliver far more value at a much higher level somewhere else. And if you just challenge yourself with just that one thing, which is, instead of me thinking about the massive big goal and everything, tomorrow I've got another 24 hours. So how could I actually invest that time more effectively so that it turns into more and actually allows me to deliver more value? Probably not doing what I'm doing right now, but doing it a little bit different or with other people. What would I do? I really believe that when we get that, we realize that when it comes to money, when you spend your money, you can always get more. When you spend your time, it never comes back. So start by really investing that well.
I love that. How can we find out where to get your book and find out more information about you, Roger? I appreciate it.
Come to millionairemasterplan.com. We have the book there. We also have got this big contest with like trips out to Bali and Hawaii, and where we do all our events out in Asia as well. So just come along to millionairemasterplan.com.
And we'll definitely link everything up. And best of luck. I can't wait to see you on other podcasts too, because I would actually love to meet you in person. Your stuff is really interesting, and I haven't seen anything like that before. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, Roger. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks a lot. Bye.
If you enjoy this show, I would really appreciate your wonderful words of feedback. Go leave me a review. I would love a rating, whatever you can do in the time that you've got. I would so appreciate it.